Is Google's threat to abandon Australia genuine?
And what will Paramount Plus and Disney Star bring to Australia? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to dive into the big tech stories of the week. And before we start, we'd like to dedicate this episode to the memory of one of Australia's true legends in tech journalism, Graham Phillipson, who sadly passed away earlier this week. GP was an exceptional writer, a great drinking and dining companion, and above all, a great bloke, and he will be missed. And now, on with the show. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined by a man who's almost certainly not been investing in GameStop stock this week, if only because he's still here and not on some remote tropical island, Mr. Adam Turner. Adam, if you had to invest in a near-defunct tech stock to dupe the market, which would it be?
Oh man, I'm still hoping for those shares in Palm to pay off. Once those babies come through, I'll be sitting on a beach making 20%.
So, true story here. I came within weeks of scoring some employee shares in Gateway Computer. So that's where I'd be putting my money. This is years ago before I was a tech journalist. I was that close to getting some employee vested shares, and then I gave it all away for this crazy tech journalism gig.
Magic beans.
If only I'd known then what I know now. We're also joined this week by a man who we really ought to get one of those TV correspondent badges made up for. From TV Blackbox, it's Steve Molk.
Gentlemen, I have decided that I would invest in Emmett Brown Enterprises so that I could get that DeLorean time machine going to get back and buy some Apple stock.
Smart. Yeah, I'll put some money into that. Count me in.
You know that things would go wrong with time travel. They always do, and you'd end up buying actual DeLorean stock, right?
Didn't we just live through the Biff period in United States politics?
Or you'd end up being your own grandfather.
Oh, gosh.
Happens to the best of us.
Steve's here to talk us through the latest in streaming news and its implications for Australians. And we'll be looking at everything from KO freebies to Paramount to Disney Plus and a whole lot more in just a little while. But first, the battle between the Australian government and Google that we talked about in last week's show isn't getting any less fierce, with Google actually threatening to remove its search functions from Australia entirely if the media code goes ahead. We caught up with ZDNet Australia reporter Asha Barbaschow a little earlier to talk through the implication of Google's position. Asha, welcome back to Vertical Hold.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
So, it's been a big week in Google news, although news is perhaps a bad word to use around Google HQ right now. Last Friday, after we'd recorded last week's episode, we sort of talked about this stuff. Google kind of put down a bombshell to the Senate, didn't it?
Yeah, the managing director for Australia and New Zealand, Mel Silver, she dropped the bombshell that if the media bargaining code goes ahead in its current form, that the search engine giant might have no other option but to pull its search engine from Australia in its entirety.
Boom. Bat ball home, to use a sporting reference.
Yeah, it's a big threat. That would mean no more Google search.
We knew when we discussed this again last week, they were doing this whole kind of experiment with news thing. I think there might have been an expectation of, we won't index news sites. But search is really fundamental to what Google does.
Mel Silver, she said the requirement that is in the code currently to pay for links and snippets in search, she said the requirement would set an untenable precedent for her business and the digital economy. And she echoed remarks from other submissions, such as the web inventor Tim Berners-Lee, that the code is not compatible with how search engines work or even, in fact, how the internet works.
That's never stopped us before.
Look, I find it interesting that they're picking up on the payment side, and obviously they're a business and money is important to them, and not so much the requirement around changes to the search algorithm, which I know a lot of people have focused in on as being a big problem that Google, doesn't tell anyone how its search algorithm works because that's its secret sauce. Any insight as to why they're attacking the money and not the search angle on this one?
I feel that this code is being the way that this code is being debated between the ACCC and then also federal opposition has a bit to stand in as well. It's essentially a legacy media subsidy. Even the federal opposition has said that the laws are simply an ask that the trillion-dollar company make a small contribution towards keeping Australian news media alive. And I guess central to Google's argument there is that it's not their responsibility. Everything changes. Technology has impacted absolutely every sector. Why should they have to change, as you said, their secret sauce or the way that their business has been built just to to pay for this media industry that is apparently not surviving due to Google. But the reason I think that they're focusing on the links rather than the algorithm is that that's easier to attack because it's absolutely the way that the internet does behave. So they're saying that and it comes back again to the laws of Australia versus the laws of mathematics argument, right? That you can't ask that something that is fundamental to the way something operates be changed. And I think that they have more of an argument behind that rather than, no, we're not going to hand over our algorithm.
So, Ash, I'm interested in your opinion on whether or not you think this is a good idea, because I've heard different takes from the media. There's one take you get from the media where they are journalists who totally take the media side and say, yes, media has been suffering. Google and Facebook make all this money. They don't pay a lot of tax. Therefore, they should kick in to help us. And there are other people within the media who say the media totally missed the boat when it came to the internet. They used to have all the classified advertising. They were so stupid and arrogant that they totally botched their opportunity to control that in the internet age. And now they've shot themselves in the foot and they're looking for someone to blame. And they're like, oh, Google and Facebook have got a lot of money. Let's make them pay for the fact that we screwed up. Which side of the fence do you fall there?
Well, full disclosure, we're online only. So obviously we don't have any legacy newspaper costs to make up for, I guess. But I was leaning towards the code as it's currently drafted is a little bit ridiculous in what it's asking. But then Rod Sims on Friday in his rebuttal to the tech giants, he said, and I'll quote him, if you don't produce core news, I'm sorry, you don't get on the playing field. So there's not that many people that they're going to have to deal with. And while what constitutes core news was not actually discussed, outside of the likes of it being the ABC, SBS, Guardian, Murdoch publications, etc., that kind of gives me an impression that he believes that online only publications should be considered non-core news. So, I mean, that's a way to lose me as a supporter, isn't it?
It's a way to lose a lot of people as supporters.
So, how real is Google's actual threat? I mean, they could certainly, I guess, take the monetary hit of not getting all that kind of search revenue, but is this just a negotiating tactic?
It's hard to tell whether this is just an empty threat or whether it's going to come to fruition. I don't have the figures in front of me right now, but Australia is just a tiny part of the market for Google. It will impact their revenue as a whole, but it won't impact their revenue as much as Australia really seems to think it will. If they were to pull search from Australia, I think they would be okay as a company. They've got a very successful business otherwise. So I mean, they could.
I'm sure Google will survive. They'll be fine. They'll be able to, sleep on their big
Struggle
pile
on
of money at
somehow.
night. What would Australians do without Google search beyond the folks who might just VPN back into Google search? Because there's a handful of search engine competitors, aren't there?
I mean, who can you think of? We've got Bing that Microsoft tries to force you to use on Edge and any of their kind of devices. DuckDuckGo. Uh, I'm a technology journalist and I can't think of anything else off the top of my head.
You've
That's
probably
saying
named
something.
you've probably named the two most prominent, and the weird thing with DuckDuckGo is it uses Bing, so does Yahoo, so does there's a
Right.
green one called Ecosia. There's a few others, but it's almost all Bing once you scrape the labels off.
Even my parents, when they're forced to use Bing, for example, type in Google. to the Bing search.
I'd love to be the person on Bing who has to put in that report every month of this is how many people Googled Google.
Or Binged Google in this
Or,
case.
Binged
yes.
or Binged Google.
I might just say, just if I may, Google threatening to pull search, Facebook actually did their own kind of threat a few months ago, threatening to pull news from its platform. It said that people don't go to Facebook with the idea of viewing news. It just kind of happens to show up on their aptly named newsfeed. That while the arguments of misinformation and fake news are something altogether in a different kind of for a different time, it mustn't be forgotten that they want to pull news as well. If this code goes ahead, not just Google, but Facebook is more a curated sort of environment. You get to choose essentially who you follow and then what news outlets you follow, whereas as Google, you just type in the keywords. Obviously, you all know how to use a search engine.
So I would have thought that the bigger difference, though, is Facebook's basically said, if I understand their argument correctly, you won't be able to share news on Facebook if you're coming from an Australian IP address. Again, VPNs may have a story to tell there. But whereas Google's saying, we will pull search entirely. You will not be able to search
Anything
with Google. And that's got implications for all sorts of Australian businesses outside of the news space, because suddenly they've got to rely on whether or not Bing's going to, surface them or not, and indeed whether or not Google actually indexes them in the first place for international
right. I mean, Australia is fundamentally a country built on small businesses, and Silver, she actually used that as part of her argument. It's used for XYZ, for the good of people. People leave reviews on hairdressing salons, pubs, cafes, electricians, and if they need to find a locksmith because they're trying to access the keys that they've locked inside, for example, simply typing in locksmith Sydney, all of that is daily use of how people use search, not just for news. And they've, like you've said, they've threatened to pull the entirety of the service from Australia, which impacts absolutely everything, really. Hate to be dramatic, but it really does.
Oh, I don't think you're the first person to be dramatic in this debate. I think that's how we got to where we are. It's interesting that both Facebook and Google have kind of said, we're not adverse to the idea of handing over money. We just want to do it on our terms. What have we heard from them in terms of their own codes of conduct or other ways that they want to deal with this problem?
Well, it was actually revealed on Friday that both Facebook and Google were kind of blindsided by the announcement of the mandatory code. Facebook said that it was ready to provide what did they say, a draft proposal to the government. But as they were preparing to do that, and obviously this was during 2020 when COVID kind of stuffed around timelines for everything, understandably. But yeah, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg jumped in and said the progress on a voluntary code had been limited, and said therefore that he'd made the decision to set in place a mandatory code. But Facebook actually said that it, was preparing a model for a possible commercial solution, and were blindsided by the mandatory code. They believe that if the announcement of the mandatory code didn't happen when it did, that both Facebook and Google would have had something workable that could have been, in their opinion, better than the one that's on the table now.
But if they argue that this isn't necessary because it's not their fault that the media screwed up their own business model, why should they give them any money? Why should they agree? Why should they introduce their own code? Isn't that kind of admitting that, yeah, you're right, we should be paying?
I think that would be just a result of having to abide by the laws in the country that you operate in, rather than admitting any fault. Both parties also brought up the multinational, I'm going to get this wrong, but the MAAL, the tax avoidance law that came in a few years ago, which meant they had to change how they pay tax in Australia. Obviously, they didn't want to pay more tax, but they're abiding by that because they're the laws, and that's not something that would get them to pull out. I think what they could have provided as their solution or their idea would have still gone some way to fund some of this legacy media without having to pay the salaries of journalists.
When you say legacy media, that's really sort of, I think, cuts to the core of it from what you were saying before. If this was really about supporting news, then they should be just as keen to give money to ZDNet as to the traditional media, the old school media. But what this really feels like is a bailout for the newspaper giants who couldn't navigate their way through the .com boom. It's got nothing to do with news if they don't care about all the online news outlets.
Well, there's not actually any clause written into the code dictating that publishers must pass the money on to the actual creators of the content. And kind of ignoring the layoffs that have plagued the journalism industry for the last couple of years, Rod Sims reckons the code will actually result in more journalists. But there's like I said, there's no clause.
So it could just go to shareholders.
There is clause. There's no clause.
Yeah, it could just go to shareholders. Let's look at what's happened in newsrooms in the last 20 years. Are they really going to turn it around and bring all those people back when they've sold all those buildings and changed their models? Or are they just going to go, oh, that's a nice little bonus at the end of the year? I don't think it'll be the former.
I mean, I hope it will. As someone who has a handful of friends in this industry who have lost their jobs over the years, and myself, it took me a very long time to land a job, given there is just not that many out there. I hope that it will, but and if that happens, great. That's a positive from the code, but I'm not convinced that it will without some sort of clause designating that it do so.
Awesome. I suppose, yeah, that may well be it. Now, Asha, if people want to find your work or yourself online, where can they do that?
First place is zdnet.com. Go straight to the site rather than typing it into Google search, I guess. Get used to that. And on Twitter, you can find me, Asha B with 5 E's.
All the E's. Very impressive. And of course, as we're asking every journalist this year, your choice for the best children's cartoon character.
I can't say one of the 4 main South Park characters, can I? That's probably not the best for children. Even though I liked it when I was younger. I mean, I watched it as a child, not that my parents knew that I did. Let's go with that cute little Bluey dog.
Bluey's an excellent and patriotic choice. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So, Steve, it's looking like another huge year in streaming. Paramount Plus. What is Paramount Plus? Where does it come from? Is it worth getting excited about?
Well, look, they are all great questions, Adam. Remember 10 all access? Don't answer.
Vaguely.
Nobody does.
Aren't they the punch?
I still wake up in the cold sweats, but yes.
Amazon used to be the punchline. Now they are the punchline.
Oh, and before that was our glorious friends of Presto. Look, if you recall, CBS bought the 10 network here in Australia.
CBS
and
cares.
in the States, CBS have a streaming service called CBS All Access, where there is a vast amount of content in there and all sorts of stuff around their television product. Here, 10 All Access has always been kind of a watered down version of that. Acknowledging that there's, series that are in the States on CBS All Access that are not here because of deals with places like Netflix and SBS and even Stan, which took that content because there wasn't, ability to share it. Paramount Plus is their announced sort of Q2 in 2020, their entry into the serious international streaming situation, removing CBS All Access, removing/rebranding 10 All Access here in Australia. And the inference is that we will get a whole bunch more content and another streaming service we apparently will want to sign up for.
But what kind of content are we talking about here? Because, as you said, a lot of these rights are elsewhere. And I think the last time we brought this up, Star Trek Below Decks was brought up. That's just bounced into Amazon Prime Video in Australia,
yes,
for example. So what's Paramount got left?
And that's the real question, because in the States, it's a reasonably easy sell because Paramount Pictures, the movie studio, which is owned by CBS, have a whole bunch of movie content they can just pull straight into that. And then from a TV perspective, there's also TV content that Paramount make, that CBS make, that all flow into that. So it's a bit of a rebadge, but with additional stuff and original content, as we've discussed, that will play into that. So, for example, Star Trek Picard, The Good Fight, and so on. All of that will land into Paramount Plus in the States, which launches there on the 4th of March this year.
Do we
They
know how
have
much they want
announced,
for it? Sorry.
look, in the States, that's all right. In the States, they're toying with the idea that, get this, and God bless them for this, there will be a $6 US per month, get in, or if you want it without ads, and who wants it with ads and has to pay for it, for $10 a month. Now that's American dollars for the American launch. Here in Australia, they have given us only the indication it's coming in the middle of the year. That also means we have to wait to hear what will be in the library, given all of these acknowledged, already farmed out shows to other places.
Have we seen other services in Australia try and do this thing of a certain price or pay more if you don't want ads? I know we've seen it like Spotify or like audio services, but have we seen it in video services before?
Oh, look, if I recall correctly, other than ads by the platform itself, and Hey You is particularly rampant when it comes to this, here's another show on our platform you might like. Don't show me the ads. I mean, if you're into that kind of Kardashian-esque stuff. Not that I would know. The challenge is there hasn't been in Australia an ad-supported paid streaming service that we've had to see or deal with. There are absolutely services that we have to pay for. We know all about that already. There are services that we can get with ads, thanks very much 7 Plus, 9 Now, and the rest of them, but we don't have to pay for that. That's kind of always been the trade-off here. And I'd expect that what we'll get here in Australia when Paramount Plus does come is there won't be a cheaper buy-in ad-supported platform, because that would lean on the 10 network sales team to have to sell ads into it. And there ain't no way we're going to want to do that. And there ain't no way they're going to want to do that.
Yeah, look, it's tricky, and it's almost the reverse of what Foxtel did, because when they launched, they had very few ads, and these days they've got a lot of ads across everything.
Yes, on Foxtel Now/Go, on Binge and KO, they remain, other than promos for themselves, ad-free.
I wouldn't have a lot of faith that that's because they don't want to run ads. I suspect it's because they have trouble selling them.
Oh, I reckon they know their market, actually. I mean, the challenge, sorry to hijack this, the challenge for KO and Binge is that they are Stream Motion, products, and Stream Motion is a wholly owned subsidiary of Foxtel. However, the way those businesses function, as in Foxtel and Stream Motion, they, at least at a PR level, are absolutely at each other's throats. They are fighting tooth and nail for a little bit of oxygen. They want to point out, hey, we got this stuff first versus these guys, and we're doing this and they're doing that, and we're better than them. And that's phenomenal. And I think that's part of Binge and KO's selling points, particularly because they go, well, here's our content, and you get it ad-free. Please note, with the exception of the traditional live streamed versions of their channels, which are buried in each product.
Now, Steve, we were talking about US services and US pricing and so on. The other thing that we've seen a bit of in the past couple of weeks in the streaming space in the US is content providers or content being snaffled up by other bigger providers. That cannibalization of smaller services. NBC, I think it is, has paid potentially up to $1 billion for the exclusive WWE rights. Roku's paid a considerable quantity less for what's left of Quibi.
About $350.
Do you think actually, two questions really. Do you think we're seeing the cannibalization of those smaller services because there's too much for the market to cover? But also, more locally, given Roku is the Telstra TV, do you think there's any chance that we'll start seeing Quibi content pop up there?
Oh, look, I have so many jokes about Roku and Quibi. It's not funny. None of them are very good, but let's start with this one. It was more of a mercy killing around Roku buying Quibi than anything else. Will we see anything come from that platform? No, there was never any meat there to start with. And then. I don't expect that we'll rush to see Quibi content land on the Telstra TV because it's just a buy-in product for Telstra, rebadging and reworking the Roku product to deliver here. It might happen. Who knows? I don't know if anyone will pay attention, even if it does come to us, to be frank.
Well, because it is Quibi. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. as opposed to like big, and this will be, I think, probably the trend over the next 5 to 10 years when it comes to particularly streaming content. Bigger companies cannibalizing other companies to draw the content in to become the mega streaming monolith that says, "Come to us, we've got all these things." Because Netflix kind of held their own by developing their own content, and that became lusted after by the likes of your NBCs and everybody else. So they kind of started to borrow from Netflix's playbook. Um, Disney buying Fox, for example, 20th Century Fox, gave them a raft of content that obviously fleshed out Disney Plus when it launched, but left them with a real problem outside of North America. And that was, what do they do ostensibly with all that Hulu content and other Fox content that doesn't lean into the Disney family friendly kind of remit?
Are you suggesting that Peg Bundy's not a Disney princess now?
Oh, look, she is, and goodness gracious, it's Disney Princesses After Dark. Copyright me, I will absolutely executive produce that. But we're seeing that come to pass now. We knew when they launched this idea late, I think it was Q4 2020, that this new, let's call it a channel, but it's really another tab on the Disney Plus platform interface called Star, which has a lot of this, let's call it adult or not so directly kid/family focused content that is going to lend stuff like Alias, Desperate Housewives, Bob's Burgers, in TV sort of situation. And then you've got, the Grand Budapest Hotel, Devil Wears Prada, Die Hard, God bless us.
Nice.
Those kinds of things landing on Star inside your Disney Plus. So for Australian subscribers, when that launches, and Disney Plus have just announced that will launch here in Australia on the 23rd of February, and they are raising the price for the Disney Plus subscription. So get in now, particularly if you have the cash, to buy an annual subscription while it's cheap, because next time it's going to be up a little bit. Not heaps. It's non-negotiable. There's no add-on function to this. In Australia, they're just raising the price, but it'll be another tab that can be pin controlled so that the kids can't accidentally go from The Simpsons or from Pixar into an episode of Married with Children. But it will allow parents to give them some confidence that there's also other stuff that they might like to watch. 450 movies, 155 TV series that are all replays or additional content already added in, and already planned 4 original series coming to Star when it launches.
So have they said how much this price rise is going to be?
It's going up from, I think it's $8.99 a month Australian to $11.99 a month, or from $89, $90 a year to $119.99 or $120 a year.
That was Disney Plus's Achilles heel when it launched, though. It looked great if you are your household was of a certain demographic, but there just wasn't enough there to keep other people there. So do you think?
Whoa! Let's be fair. 30-something episodes of the series of The Simpsons is a lot to keep you satisfied. However,
only
I
the first
acknowledge
10 seasons that are actually worth watching. Though.
See, this is the bad thing here. From about season 24 on, it picked back up again, and it's phenomenal. But
really?
I appreciate your point.
But so how nervous would you be if you were the others? Because if you were the others, you can go, oh, well, Disney's like, they'll go for that kids market. But now if you're a Netflix or an Amazon, you're like, well, they're a proper, fully fleshed out service. You'd be a bit more concerned about them now, wouldn't you?
Look, absolutely. If you were the people in Australia responsible for, hypothetically, the Paramount Plus launch, you'd be going, we better have a bloody great library when we do launch, allegedly in the middle of the year. If you are the content people responsible for Stan in Australia, you'd be making sure you've got a whole bunch of stuff locked down tight. Because as something like Disney Plus gets this sort of broader entertainment option through Star, that starts to mean it's going to be very directly compared to Stan. Now, while we also acknowledge all of these a la carte services, you can have them 1 month and drop them the next and come back, and there's no penalty in that happening. Disney Plus and to a degree Amazon Plus are the only services that offer you effectively a discount for an annual subscription. You can't buy a year of Netflix and get it cheaper, other than sort of getting Netflix subscription cards on the cheap through Big W or whatever. But you follow my methodology here. this is a really smart move by Disney using their assets and trying to grow that platform. And it's not just us, of course. This is an international rollout that they're delivering. It's just we get it on the 23rd of Feb. Netflix will keep doing what Netflix keeps doing. Same with Amazon. It really is down to what are 10 going to do / CBS and how are Stan going to weather this storm.
Economically, are they running into a problem here where people are going to start to run out of brothers-in-laws? You pay for Netflix, your brother-in-law pays for Disney, your other brother-in-law pays for Stan, and whatever. Once you start to run out of brother-in-laws, it's like, okay, something's got to give. Are we reaching that point where something's got to give?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're almost at that now when you consider that, let's be realistic, Netflix is almost a given for most households that are interested in any kind of, reasonable content on our various devices. Stan in Australia is absolutely worth the money even still, and more so with Stan Sport. I know we'll talk about that in a second. Um, Amazon is a give or take, but it's the cheapest of the lot of them, and it gives you other benefits. Disney Plus is just reinforcing its situation. So those for themselves will cost you, I think across the year, I did the math, we're pushing over $200 for just those four. And then when you throw in the possibility.
About a month of Foxtel then.
Oh, well, not if you throw Foxtel Now at it, or Binge is heaps cheaper, right? So depending if you fall in the K or Binge category, there's that. And then Paramount Plus could be really great for us, which only adds to it. So that's 5, 6, nearly, I think 6 or 7 actually, services that if you are hungry for the latest, interesting, buzzy, exciting content, you're starting to drop some serious coin just to be across everything.
Plus Shudder, plus any of the numerous tiny sports services.
Acorn TV, the BBC
BritBox.
one.
No, actually, forget BritBox, but there's plenty of things you could be subscribed to it, for sure.
Yeah, there is heaps. And you're right. And then there are also free ones that pop up on, particularly smart devices, smart TVs that give you access to maybe, sure, it's older stuff, but there's a whole bunch of free stuff.
One thing that never seems to come up in conversation, am I the only one who's noticed that the picture quality on Stan is crap? If people start going, one's got to go, you find there's a lot of overlapping in content between Stan and Amazon. And everything
Hang on,
looks
are you talking about the library content or picture quality?
The picture quality. The
Okay.
picture quality on Stan is terrible in terms of the compression artifacts and the detail in the shadows. Try watching Seinfeld on Stan and then switch to Amazon. But I'm just okay. Try watching, because I did this the other night. I watched Top Gun and I jumped between them as well. You can really see the difference, and I don't know if Stan's been stingy on the back end or if it's the licensing deal they've got. But I've never heard anyone else bring it up. Is it just me?
It sounds like it.
Okay, well, that's all right. I'm glad we covered it. Yeah.
Adam, bear in mind as well, Stan, like Netflix, does that differentiation between its plans. So you could well be on their standard def plan. I don't know.
Are you a tight ass?
For sure. Well, I think we know the answer to that one.
Yeah, I think we do. I'm pretty sure I'm not, but to be honest, I probably should go and double check that. Hadn't occurred to me.
It's a fair question. I haven't seen it. I have heard other people talk about similar to what you say. Though they haven't singled out Stan. They have said Netflix at various times or whatever. And I think Alex is right that it could just be maybe you got the cheaper plan and not the HD plan. I find it difficult because I watch platforms on a bunch of different sort of devices between my iPad. I'll even sometimes do it on my iPhone just to see what the app's like. Primarily, though, I watch it either on a 32-inch or a 65-inch TV. And the joy of something like a Disney Plus or an Amazon Prime Video to me is that I will make sure I prioritize that content on my big screen because it's 4K and I get that for free. I'm not paid for a specific ratio. Whereas for Netflix and Stan, as Alex pointed out, I'm paying for HD services for both of them, which still looks great on my 65, but you compare The Mandalorian, content that's made this year with the latest technology on my 4K screen looks infinitely incredible. But when I compare that to, say, I'm watching an episode of The Office on Stan, it's still great, but it's not made for, that ratio, shall we say.
Yeah, but even that old stuff, you can really see that standard def stuff, you can really see the difference. And it's not the resolution, it's the bit rate. It's the amount of detail in the picture.
How many people at your house are doing things at the same time?
But I got 100 meg cable, so that's not the problem.
Well,
No,
potentially it is, though, Adam. I was going to say, because there's two things at play here. One, you're on cable, which, let's face it, can be
Yeah,
variable
true.
as heck.
Yep.
And we're also in a period where people are coming out of school holidays where I always notice this in my home office. My internet quality just dives off a cliff because there's so many more people on the cable. But also, you've then got the adaptive streaming stuff that pretty much all of these players do, where they try and match what they're sending you and buffer a bit. And so, I mean, I've certainly seen this with Netflix, and I don't think this is a unique thing to me, that something will start out bad, then it'll get good for a bit, and then it'll
Yeah.
drop down a bit. So I reckon there could be a bit of that in play as well.
I'll check it.
Speaks
I'll have a
truth.
chat to Stan and find out. See if there's something going on in the back end.
So the other, I guess, equalizer, Steve, for all of this that Disney hasn't gotten into yet until the Mickey NFL launches is sport. I'm going to hand this over to Adam, obviously, but I mean, Stan's doing sport, and I think KO's doing freebies now, like stuff that you don't have to pay them money. Foxtel giving programming away. What's that all about?
It's an interesting move. We knew that Stan, when they announced last year that they were going to be introducing an add-on sport package that was, I'll say pay-per-view. The whole package is a paid-for amount. They've confirmed just today that it will be $10 a month on top of your Stan subscription. So if you're paying I think it's $14.99. I'm just grasping in the air at the moment for their HD monthly pricing. And you want to get the Stan Sport, add $10. So all of a sudden you're at $25 a month to be able to watch the Super Rugby, your New Zealand Rugby, your Rugby Championship, Bledisloe Cup, all of those things. And they have already announced that they are negotiating with a bunch of other sports to bring into this because, to be frank, if it was just Stan Rugby, it's not that attractive. However, they're lining it up so that it is ready to go. You can pre-register today for a 30-day free trial once it gets going. So once they activate it, it's ready to go. But this is a smart move by them in getting people ready for it so that they can say, oh, by the way, here's another sport. Here's another sport. Here's the next thing. And that will only continue to grow where Stan, as of course a fully owned subsidiary of Nine, get to lean into and becomes another portion of, hey, when we're renegotiating the rights for this sport, we can give you full streaming service through Stan as a priority in Stan Sport and those kinds of things. And then flip it and you move over to the charity that is Foxtel, who got, I think it was $40 million from the federal government since 2017 to boost the coverage of female and underrepresented sport in Australia. They really needed the help. What they're introducing on KO Sports is essentially a bunch of freebies. So specific games or events or, for example, the Mount Panorama 500 that's coming up for supercars, that's going to be live and available through KO without the need to put your credit card on the table. So they're trying to KO are trying to draw new subscribers in through the freebies program. Stan are trying to add value to their subscribers by saying, here's sport, but we want you to pay for it.
I can't remember if we talked about this at the end of last year, but the fact that these streaming services are buying up big sporting tournaments, do you think that's pretty much the death knell for multi-channel free-to-air coverage of sporting events? Instead of getting the Olympics on spread across 2 or 3 channels, you'll get one channel and then you've got to sign up for something if you want to watch the rest of it.
I'm assuming the Olympics ever happens again.
Yeah, assuming the Olympics ever happens again, or the World Cup, or anything like that. A tennis tournament, anything where at the moment they'd be showing it across several channels. Do you think that will disappear and we'll go back to the way it was before?
Yeah, not while the anti-siphoning list exists at the federal government level. There's a whole bunch of particularly explicit sporting events that have to be on free-to-air. Week to week, I think there's the capacity that, for Stan and for Nine, this brings them a great opportunity to try and negotiate with, for example, the NRL when this becomes an opportunity to say, hey, give us all of the streaming rights and we'll deliver it through Stan Sport rather than, do a hodgepodge deal with Telstra or whoever. We just want to take all of the things. And that's really Nine's approach. When they're doing their negotiations, they want to deliver all of your programming, particularly your sporting content, across all of their platforms.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Steve for tearing himself away from the TV and making time for the show.
You're not my real mum.
Indeed, I'm not. But just like your mother, Steve, I have 3 quick questions for you.
Yes.
If people want to find your work online or yourself on social media, Where can they do that? And also, more importantly, your vote for the best children's cartoon character.
Oh, goodness gracious. Well, I'm at Steve Molk everywhere that it counts. I write for and talk about all of the content that comes out of tvblackbox.com.au, and we have the TV Blackbox podcast and the TV Bingebox podcast, which are absolutely your weekly television hit that you want to subscribe to. Best cartoon character. I mean, we go across the whole gamut here, right? By default, I'd say it's something like Yosemite Sam, but we're not just talking Warner Brothers. We could be talking Ahsoka Tano. We could be talking, man, the Muppet Babies, if that's what turns you on. I mean, there's all sorts of places you could go with this.
As long as you're talking the classic Muppet Babies and not the new weird CGI ones, I'm with you.
Agreed.
But while I'm speaking, of course, I should also give thanks to Asha for making time for the show earlier as well. And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, on the web at verticalhold.com.au, or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
As always, everyone, thanks for tuning in again. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. Leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice, because it really does help us get out there and spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Rick and Morty. I mean, goodness, how can you go past those idiots?
Not exactly a kids show, though. I would not let my kids watch that. I want to vote for Krieger from Archer, and Alex said, no, I can't vote for Krieger. He's the best.
You get no votes, Mr. Turner. I have spoken.